August 17th, 2025, 10 p.m. 13 people were enjoying a weekend camping trip in Inner Mongolia's Urat rear banner when the night sky exploded with water. In less than 30 minutes, 10 of them were dead. 3 others vanished into churning torrents that materialized from bone-dry creek beds. Now, this wasn't the only flash flood disaster hitting northern China that weekend. While rescue teams searched for camping victims in Inner Mongolia, another catastrophe was simultaneously unfolding 500 kilometers south in Gansu province, where 13 more people died and 30 others disappeared in floods that dumped half a year's rain in 24 hours. Welcome to Earth's Dark Secrets. What I'm about to reveal will show you why northern China, historically protected by desert geography, has become a flash flood killing zone where recreational activities and rural communities face identical death sentences from the same atmospheric phenomenon. The Inner Mongolia camping tragedy exposes something that outdoor recreation authorities desperately want hidden. Flash flood risk assessments for northern China are based on climate data that no longer applies to current weather realities. Urat rear banner sits in the Gobi Desert's eastern edge, where annual precipitation rarely exceeds 200 millimeters. For decades, the region marketed itself as ideal for outdoor adventures precisely because of its predictably arid conditions. Then, August 17th shattered every assumption about desert flood safety. Meteorological analysis reveals that the camping victims were killed by what hydrologists call upstream precipitation events. Essentially, massive rainfall occurring dozens of kilometers away from the actual flood location. The campers experienced clear skies while deadly water was already racing toward them through desert arroyos. The 13 campers had no warning because northern China's flash flood detection systems were designed for agricultural and industrial protection, not recreational safety. Weather stations monitor precipitation patterns for crop irrigation and mining operations, not for temporary camping sites in remote desert locations. By the time water reached the camping area, it was moving at approximately 15 meters per second. That is faster than most vehicles travel through urban areas. The victims had perhaps 90 seconds to recognize the danger and reach higher ground, but desert camping sites are deliberately located in low-lying areas for wind protection. While Inner Mongolia's camping disaster dominated headlines, an even deadlier scenario was simultaneously developing in Yuzhong County, Gansu province, where atmospheric conditions created a hydrological apocalypse. August 7th marked the beginning of what meteorologists would later classify as a stationary precipitation event. These are essentially tropical intensity storm systems locked directly over northwestern China's most vulnerable communities. Yuzhong County received up to half of its average annual rainfall in 24 hours, but the distribution pattern reveals the systematic vulnerabilities that turned extreme weather into mass casualties. The county's 13 confirmed deaths and 30 missing persons tell us the human cost of infrastructure designed for climate conditions that no longer exist. Northwestern China's drainage systems were engineered using precipitation data from 1950 to 2000, when regional weather patterns followed predictable seasonal cycles. All these historical parameters shaped construction standards that could handle modest spring rains and brief summer thunderstorms. Not tropical intensity deluges delivered with the hydraulic force of industrial pressure systems. When half a year's precipitation hit infrastructure designed for gentle runoff, the physics changed completely. Storm drains became pressurized torrents, retention ponds became launching points for debris-laden floods, and residential areas built in natural drainage channels became death traps. The dual disasters, camping deaths in Inner Mongolia and community annihilation in Gansu, triggered something unprecedented in Chinese disaster management. President Xi Jinping issued emergency directives within hours of the first casualty reports.
Chinese President Xi Jinping has ordered an all-out rescue and relief operations as heavy downpours and flooding has killed over 100 people in the south of that country. President Xi said local governments have to fulfill their responsibilities and urged the army to actively participate in the efforts. And flooding has affected over 38 million people in 27 provinces, forcing the Chinese government to raise its alert to its second highest level.
For 2 decades, Beijing concentrated flood defense investments in historically wet southern provinces while treating northern regions as naturally drought-resistant. The assumption was that climate change would intensify existing patterns rather than completely redistribute precipitation zones. Instead, atmospheric circulation changes pushed moisture-laden storm systems into regions with virtually no flood infrastructure. Xi's emergency mobilization essentially acknowledged that China's entire climate preparedness framework was built on obsolete meteorological assumptions. If northern China requires comprehensive flood defenses, Beijing must reallocate hundreds of billions in infrastructure spending while admitting systematic planning failures to 200 million residents assured they lived in climatically stable regions. While media attention focused on the camping tragedy in Gansu floods, a third catastrophe was quietly unfolding in Inner Mongolia's Ordos region. This event literally revealed the true scope of northern China's flash flood crisis. August 19th brought record-breaking rainfall to Ordos, triggering flash floods that killed 3 people and left 3 others missing. Ordos is clear evidence that northern China's most economically valuable regions are equally vulnerable to hydrological collapse. As you know, Ordos serves as the heart of China's coal extraction industry, with mining operations worth hundreds of billions of yuan. The region's emergency protocols were designed exclusively for industrial accidents and equipment failures, not hydrological disasters that could threaten both human lives and critical energy infrastructure simultaneously. The 3 confirmed deaths occurred when floodwaters overwhelmed drainage systems designed to handle industrial runoff, not tropical intensity precipitation. Victims were caught in areas where mining infrastructure created artificial flood channels that concentrated water flow through populated zones. Recovery operations face ongoing complications because contaminated industrial runoff mixed with flood waters, creating toxic debris fields that require specialized cleanup procedures. The simultaneous flooding disasters across Inner Mongolia and Gansu province show the emergence of entirely new atmospheric dynamics that challenge fundamental assumptions about regional climate patterns. Meteorological analysis reveals that all 3 locations experienced impacts from the same massive atmospheric river system, a high-altitude channel of water vapor transport that carried subtropical moisture into northwestern regions with no historical experience of such precipitation intensities. Traditional weather models categorize atmospheric rivers as coastal phenomena affecting regions with established tropical weather patterns. The August 2025 events marked the first time such systems penetrated deep into continental desert regions. If you don't know, this creates hydrological conditions that existing infrastructure simply cannot handle. Climate scientists predict that northwestern China must now prepare for tropical intensity precipitation events in areas where such phenomena have no historical precedent. Beyond the confirmed casualties, the northern China flood crisis affected over 4,000 residents who found themselves stranded in communities cut off from external assistance. The stranded population reveals the geographic vulnerabilities that compound natural disasters into prolonged emergencies. Northwestern China's mountainous terrain creates natural bottlenecks where single infrastructure failures can isolate entire communities for extended periods. Emergency supply chains optimized for earthquake response proved inadequate for flood scenarios that required different logistical approaches. Food distribution networks, medical evacuation procedures, and communication systems all required real-time improvisation when confronted with hydrological rather than seismic challenges. Recovery operations face ongoing complications, as damaged infrastructure requires complete reconstruction rather than repair. Roads washed away by flash floods must be entirely re-engineered to handle drainage requirements based on updated precipitation projections that account for atmospheric river penetration into previously arid regions. The northern China disasters occurred against the backdrop of Beijing's own devastating floods from July 2025, which killed 44 people. If the capital city, with unlimited resources and sophisticated early warning systems, suffered such catastrophic losses, rural northwestern communities faced exponentially greater vulnerabilities when confronted with similar hydrological challenges. The temporal proximity of these disasters reveals accelerating patterns of extreme weather that outpace infrastructure adaptation capabilities. Beijing's flood defenses, upgraded at enormous expense following previous disasters, proved inadequate within months of completion. This cascading failure pattern suggests that China's reactive approach to flood defense, upgrading infrastructure only after disasters occur, cannot keep pace with rapidly evolving climate realities that generate new types of hydrological threats. The distribution of casualties and rescue resources during the multiple northern China disasters reveals very disturbing patterns in emergency response priorities that prioritize economic assets over human vulnerability. The Inner Mongolia camping victims received immediate search and rescue mobilization because the incident occurred near tourism infrastructure with significant economic value. Rural Gansu communities with limited commercial significance experienced longer response delays despite higher casualty numbers. Communities lacking industrial or commercial significance received proportionally less emergency support regardless of population vulnerability or casualty severity. The geographic distribution of confirmed deaths across all three incidents correlates with distance from major infrastructure networks and communication systems. Remote populations consistently faced longer response times and fewer evacuation options compared to areas near industrial or administrative centers. Chinese meteorological services have issued unprecedented warnings for continued above-average rainfall across northern China through September 2025, with potential typhoon systems threatening regions that have never experienced tropical storm impacts. This simply means that the August disasters were the beginning rather than the conclusion of northern China's hydrological crisis. Climate models suggest this pattern will intensify rather than stabilize, requiring fundamental shifts in how northern China approaches flood preparedness, emergency response, and long-term climate adaptation strategies. The August 2025 multiple disaster scenario provides evidence of permanent climate pattern shifts that will require massive population relocations and infrastructure adaptations across northern China. Atmospheric circulation changes indicate that moisture-carrying storm systems will increasingly target regions housing millions of residents and infrastructure designed for arid conditions. The camping tragedy, rural community annihilation, and industrial zone flooding represent different manifestations of the same fundamental problem: obsolete climate assumptions embedded in regional development planning. Beijing confronts an impossible economic calculation: invest hundreds of billions retrofitting northwestern China for tropical intensity flooding, or manage controlled population relocations from regions becoming climatically unstable. Early indicators suggest Chinese authorities are pursuing managed adaptation over wholesale infrastructure replacement, with post-disaster recovery funding emphasizing population relocation rather than rebuilding flood-resistant communities in high-risk areas. The 26 confirmed deaths across Inner Mongolia and Gansu province represent the human cost of China's fundamental strategic miscalculation, spending decades preparing for climate change impacts in wrong locations using obsolete weather models. Northern China's infrastructure was designed for 20th century climate patterns that no longer exist. The region now faces 21st century weather phenomena with drainage systems, construction standards, and emergency procedures optimized for entirely different environmental conditions. Until Beijing acknowledges that northern China requires complete climate infrastructure redesign based on emerging rather than historical weather patterns, every significant precipitation event becomes a potential mass casualty disaster for millions of vulnerable residents. Thanks for watching Earth's Dark Secrets, where we expose the hidden realities behind our planet's most devastating disasters. If this investigation revealed something the mainstream media won't tell you, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps us uncover the stories that authorities don't want told. Hit the bell so you never miss our in-depth analysis of the disasters that reveal our planet's dark truths.